Ladies and gentlemen, this is the January 27th, 2016 meeting of the Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals. In the absence of our chair and vice chair today, we will need to take a nomination and a second and then a vote to name a chair for today's meeting.
I nominate Brother Ken Halliburton.
Thank you.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, I guess.
All right. I will turn the floor over to Mr. Halliburton.
All right. First thing on our agenda is the consideration of minutes for our regular meeting on December the 17th. Are there any changes or modifications of those minutes?
No.
If not, we'll accept them as approved. Under new business, we have a variance request. It's application Z16001 by Lanny Goodwin of the Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department, requesting the following two variances for property in the park district located at 120 DeJarnett Lane. And the first variance request as part of this application is a 40-foot variance from Section 18G4 of the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which prohibits lighting fixtures from exceeding 20 feet in height in non-residential developments with structures 35 feet or less in height, and a variance from Section 18GD of the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which requires outdoor lighting to be designed such that illumination does not exceed 1/2 foot candle beyond the property line. Mr. Anthony, if you will review those various requests, we would appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. The Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department wishes to construct 2 new recreation fields, a playground, and a concourse with restrooms and concession area at McKnight Park, located at 120 DeJarnett Lane. This property is located within the P zoning district, so the use is allowed by right. The project includes the Miracle Field, which will serve children and adults who may have difficulties using existing parks in our park system. I'm going to scroll through a couple of photos here as we go. As shown on the aerial photos in your packet, the fields and associated uses will be located near the southeastern corner of the intersection of DeJarnett and Memorial Boulevard. The new fields will replace 2 existing practice fields. The site plan submitted by the applicant shows minor changes to a nearby parking area, mainly with the addition of several accessible parking spaces. The applicant is proposing 6 new outdoor lighting poles and fixtures, which would allow the fields to be used in evening hours. The poles are designated on the site layout as P1 through P6. Section 18G4 of the zoning ordinance restricts lighting height in non-residential developments such as this one to 20 feet. The applicant's first request is for a 40-foot variance from this restriction. If the variance is granted, the applicant would be allowed to install lighting poles that reach 60 feet in height. Due to the close proximity of the airport to this site, staff recommends that approval of this variance request be conditioned on the applicant providing a letter from the Federal Aviation Administration affirming that the lighting will not interfere with airport operations. Additionally, let me zoom in on this one. As shown on the photometric plot submitted by the applicant, illumination levels along the Memorial Boulevard right-of-way reach 4.58 foot candles. Section 18GD of the zoning ordinance prohibits illumination from exceeding 0.5 foot candles along property lines. This requirement is in place to prevent excessive or intrusive lighting and glare from reaching across property lines. And as shown on a supplementary exhibit, the lighting falls below the allowable 1/2 foot candle by the time it reaches the actual surface of Memorial Boulevard. The excess is simply at the property line itself. The applicant requests that the board vary the 0.5 foot candle maximum by 4.08 foot candles along the Memorial Boulevard right-of-way. In the request letter, the applicant addresses each of the 3 standards for granting a variance. First, the applicant attests that the lighting height and illumination level maximums imposed by the zoning ordinance pose a practical difficulty for this project. The applicant contends that for a field to be properly lighted, poles must exceed the 20-foot maximum height. Further, poles must be physically situated in such a way that they do not interfere with players' sight lines. Second, the applicant indicates that the very nature of McKnight Park, which is an active park with multiple recreation fields, including lighting poles that currently exceed zoning ordinance height maximums, that creates unusual characteristics when compared to other properties in the city. And third, the applicant attests that this situation is not self-created. Staff recommends that any approval include the following condition. Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for any structure included in the site plan exhibit, the applicant shall provide written correspondence from the Federal Aviation Administration affirming that the proposed lighting will not interfere with any airport or air traffic operations. Please note that the board will need to take separate votes for the two variance requests. Staff can answer any questions that you may have, and representatives of the project are in attendance today and may wish to speak more about this project as well. Thank you.
I'm Chris Camp, president of Bluffs Associates, and we're doing the construction documents, and I'll just entertain any questions that you might have.
So, Mr. Anthony, I think, and you can answer this too, I think what I heard in reference to the light candles is that once it gets to Memorial, it's actually below even having to request the variance in and of itself. It's all about the property line in question.
That's correct. If we can go to the exhibit up on the screen, I can run through that. It's a little difficult to see, but this is 4.58. This gray line represents the actual property line, and as you can see, it reaches 4.58 here. But then if we go to, we have another exhibit where the foot candles are shown along the street itself, and that same 4.58, by the time that it reaches the street, it's 0.42. So the excess foot candles are actually between the property line and the time you get to the surface of the street. And by the time you get to the surface of the street, it has sort of faded out.
Okay. I don't believe we have other questions, so we will go ahead and move forward with opening the public hearing. If you haven't attended a public hearing before the Board of Zoning Appeals or Planning Commission before, we would ask that you would keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And if you will direct your either questions or comments to the board and staff, and at the end of the public hearing, we will try to address and answer any and all questions that were brought up during the public hearing. So with that, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone to come forward that would like to speak on the application specific to DeJarnett Lane. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for any discussion or motion with respects to the variance request item AI or A1.
If no further questions, I'll make a motion to approve with the recommended conditions set by the staff.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Halliburton, we do need two separate votes. So is this on the?
That's on number
This
one.
is on the height. Okay,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify.
Said
Thank you.
All those, well, I think, we get the vote in or no?
No, I don't think
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So variance request A1 is approved. Also, we need, is there any further discussion on A2 or a motion?
There's no further discussion. I'll make a motion with regard to the illumination portion, number 2, to approve, also including the conditions set by the staff.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? With that, that variance also passes. Moving on to variance and special use permit request. This is an application Z16002 by Richard of St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church, making the following request for property in the multifamily residential district located at 1601 North Tennessee Boulevard. There is 2 portions to this application, so I'm assuming 2 separate votes also.
Correct.
The first one is a special use permit to allow a philanthropic institution in the RM16 district. And then number 2, as part of this application, a 35-foot variance from Chart 2 of the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which allows a maximum height of 35 feet for permitted non-residential uses. Mr. Anthony, if you'll review that application for us.
Thank you, sir. Richard Richard of St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church, located in the RM16 zone at 1601 North Tennessee Boulevard, wishes to install a small antenna on the church's bell tower in order to rebroadcast national programming locally. The antenna would not be affixed atop a traditional radio tower. Rather, let me get to the page here. As shown in the exhibit, it would be affixed to an existing bell tower atop the church. The antenna that the applicant proposes is relatively small, and in an exhibit provided by the applicant, the antenna appears comparable in size to a file folder. That's actually what's showing in that photo. It is staff's understanding that the antenna will not rise higher than the existing bell tower. The applicant seeks 2 actions from the board. First, a special use permit to allow the rebroadcasting of a radio signal. Due to the nature of the programming, staff has classified this use as a philanthropic institution. Between the applicant's letter and staff's evaluation of the site, the criteria for a special use permit have been addressed in the staff report. Perhaps most importantly, the applicant attests that the proposed use will have no adverse impacts on the neighborhood or on area traffic. The applicant has provided letters from both the FAA and the FCC indicating that the antenna meets their respective standards. The applicant's second request is to vary the maximum allowable height of 35 feet in the RM16 district by 35 feet to allow for 70 feet, which would allow the applicant to affix the antenna onto the existing bell tower. As noted in the staff report, the attachment of the antenna to the bell tower instead of on an independent tower elsewhere on the site would seem to be more compatible with the surroundings. Staff can answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for staff? Is it Mr. Richard, you'd like to make any comments, or are you? Is that who you are?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm
yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Just make sure.
Yes.
I didn't want to assume anything.
That's me. I'm the applicant.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Richard? I do have one. So is it going to be placed on the back of the bell tower, I'm assuming? Not facing whatever the frontage street is to St. Rose?
Correct. And the frontal part of that tower is the cross.
Okay.
And then behind it, there's a flat portion to the bell tower, and it's kind of noticeable on that photo. It would be attached to that flat portion facing the opposite way from the street.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And will it protrude out any distance? Like, is it protruding out 3 feet from the bell tower? Is it protruding out 1 foot from the bell tower, or is it protruding out at all?
It will be protruding out the back of the bell tower,
Okay.
yes. And to the specs that are on that sheet with the little diagram of the antenna, it would have to be attached. And I'm thinking, if memory serves, I think it has to be something like 3 feet away from for optimal broadcasting strength, 3 feet away from like brick or wood or from a structure.
Okay. So it's really not going to protrude out that far.
Oh,
So,
no.
all right.
No.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Shard.
Thank you.
At this time, we will open up a public hearing with respects to the special use permit for St. Rose Church. Anyone would like to speak on this application, both parts A and B of this application? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion on the first part of this application having to do with the or discussion or motion regarding a special use permit to allow the St. Rose to have this in this district.
Mr. Chairman, if no further questions, I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes. Moving on to item number 2 under this application, the 35-foot variance with respects to the maximum height. Any discussion or motion?
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion to approve the 35-foot variance.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that passes also. Moving on to special use permits, application Z16003 by Lanny Goodwin of the Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department, requesting a special use permit to allow recreation fields on property in the single-family residential district located at 3574 Liana Road.
All right. The Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department wishes to construct 6 soccer fields on city-owned property located at 3574 Liana Road. This is the 200-acre property, better known as the Jordan Farm, or as I have learned, the Jordan Farm, which has frontage along both Liana and Cherry Lane. The property is zoned RS15, and recreation fields are allowed by special use permit in this district. As shown on the site layout, the fields would be constructed along the eastern side of the property. A driveway serving the fields will be constructed along the eastern side and will connect to Cherry Lane. The staff report incorrectly indicates that the driveway will have a gravel surface. The applicant did revise the site plan to show a double bituminous surface, which does not require a variance. The applicant plans to construct a parking lot that will include 204 parking spaces. The zoning ordinance requires a minimum of 203 spaces for this use, so the applicant is meeting the city parking standards. The fields are to be used in daytime hours as no lighting is proposed. As noted in the staff report, any future lighting would require the applicant to come back to the board to seek an amendment to the special use permit, and a variance may be necessary as well. I do want to point out that the applicant held an open house at Siegel Park on December 8th, 2015. Planning staff attended the event, viewed the exhibits provided by the applicant, and observed the interactions and discussions among the applicant, the consultants, and parks staff, as well as the public. The applicant provided copies of completed comment cards to staff after the meeting, and those cards were generally supportive of the project. We did not distribute those in the electronic packets due to the sensitive nature of phone numbers and email addresses and so forth, but we have provided copies of all of those comment cards to you, as well as the sign-in sheet. The applicant does attest that all of the standards for granting a special use permit have been or will be met. Staff can answer any questions that you may have, and representatives for the project are here and may wish to discuss the project further. Thank you.
Again, my name is Chris Camp, and I'm president of Lowson Associates. And I would like to give you a little historical perspective. Originally, the city approached us to look at this property to see if they could develop a temporary practice facility without doing a lot of major earthwork and expending a lot of funds. And we developed original concept plans, and I'm going to step up to the exhibit and point to it.
There's actually a mic somewhere around here.
Okay.
Well, I meant. It's in front of that other camera. There you go.
You may need to turn it on.
Okay. Okay. When we were first approached, we looked at this part of the farm because it was the flattest, and then this part of the farm because it was the flattest areas. It also provided direct access off of Liana Road, and also working with your water department. They came back and said, you know, this is some of our best area for the reuse water distribution. We're okay with you looking at this area. So we did a full layout plan, and we're preparing that, had submitted, and we got a lot of comments from the neighbors. And so Mr. Goodwin met with some of the neighbors. Other city officials talked about it, and they came back and said, is there another place on the farm where we can develop this facility? So thus, we moved from directly across the street from all of these homes. The fields literally wrapped around and were beside these homes. We've now moved them to a section of the farm where the closest home on Cherry Lane, there are some homes that abut Cherry Lane. The closest homes are 950 feet from the soccer practice fields. The closest homes on Liana are 1,600 feet, a quarter of a mile from the practice fields. And then down on North Brook, we're 1,300 feet from the nearest homes. This is the Phase 1 plan, and as was mentioned, there is no lighting proposed at this time. There will be in the future, as well as a restroom building would be built at this site in the future. But you can see on this diagram, the future Cherry Lane expansion is proposed. I've spoken with the city engineer. He said that they think construction of that, which will be the same roadway cross-section as you have adjacent to Siegel Park, which means 4-lane divided cross-section, will be cutting through the property, and then we will come back and remove the temporary access drive, which comes in off of Cherry Lane, building a permanent paved access drive off of the new Cherry Lane expansion. So I'll take any questions you have.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject just briefly? I failed to mention earlier that we did receive written correspondence from several community members, especially this morning. I believe 7 of them, and I've provided you copies with each of those. Thank you.
You mentioned, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you said Phase 1?
Yes.
So what is Phase 2 and Phase 3, or are you at liberty to tell us what that is at this point in time?
The future phases would include removal of the double bituminous drive when Cherry Lane expansion is constructed. Once those construction drawings are finalized, then we'll know where we will add a permanent entry with a paved drive. We didn't want to put a paved drive in for less than 2 years with curb and gutter and storm and then tear it right back out. There was a request, could we add a turning lane on Cherry Lane now at the public hearing or public meeting? We met with city officials, and again, because of the expense, you would have to buy a right-of-way in order to add a turning lane, and because it was going to be just a temporary, they chose not to do that or directed us not to add a turning lane. Then the future phases would include a restroom building and lighting at some point in the future.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But at this point, no more fields?
No, no. This is the extent of the fields. And one good thing, this portion of the farm is not currently used 100% for reuse water, but we will be installing irrigation using reuse water, so we'll be helping with your application of reuse water as well.
And you may not know the answer to this question, so this may be directed towards Lanny or someone with the city. Has the money already been appropriated for the extension or, well, if you want to call it, or the redevelopment of Cherry Lane?
I know that is on the city's capital improvement plan. Where it is in terms of being budgeted or money set out for it, I'm not sure. It's on our road master plan, and it is also on our capital improvement plan for at some point during the next 3 years.
Okay.
And again, the city engineer this morning sent me an email that said he thought construction would start in 2018.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Halliburton, to answer your question, Mr. Ives is right. It's in the CIP, and it's shown in 3 phases in the CIP in 2016, 2017, and 2018. But again, that would have to be appropriated by City Council, and they do that on a year-by-year consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else on the board have questions? All right. With that, we will open the public hearing with respects to this application. Anyone that would like to come forward to speak for or against this application, please do so. And if you will, when you come to the podium, if you'll state your name and your address, please, for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Moffitt. I live at 1308 Cherry Lane. I actually be just pretty much directly in front of where those were, so I'll see those every morning as I wake up and go out. I actually have young kids who are involved in sports in the community. I actually coach a team in the community, but I am unequivocally opposed to the practice facilities. I'd like to point out this was put forth just a few months ago, and the community came together and was very strongly opposed to this. So I was very surprised to hear that there was an open house. I'd never heard anything about it. I was even more surprised to hear that the majority of the comments were favorable for this, because every neighbor that I've spoken with in the neighborhood or in this community has been opposed to this. We like to point out we already have a very large soccer complex just right down the road with 15 fields that already brings a lot of traffic down Cherry Lane where I live. Just this morning there was an accident on there. There's no shoulder. It's a very narrow road. Two cars came together in the center of the road this morning. A lot of times when soccer is in full force, the traffic will back up down Cherry Lane all the way to my driveway there, which makes getting in and out just a nightmare. And I think this is going to bring a lot more traffic to the area. As I looked back over the city's website and looked back kind of at the evolution of this, there was a January 2015 letter from Thomas Laird, who stated that the goal was to establish recreational opportunities within a 5-mile radius of the majority of the population. I fail to see how adding practice facilities quarter mile to half a mile from a very large soccer complex that already exists really furthers that goal of the city. Seems that it would make more sense to spread these out somewhere else within the city to give the majority of the population easier access to these. These are on the very north side of the city. Apparently, Lowe's and Associates looked at other options, which would include establishing community parks at multiple school sites, which would include at least one regulation soccer field at each school. That seems to me to be a much more reasonable approach to this, and would better fulfill the stated goals of putting this within a 5-mile radius of the majority of the population. I just question whether we've really exhausted alternative options here, as opposed to just putting these, going forward with the plan as it is. Would point out the last I saw, and I haven't seen this latest rendition. I couldn't find it on the website when I looked last night. The last one I looked at included porta potties, which if I asked each of you individually if you would like to look out your house each day and see porta potties there for a year or two, I would imagine you would not be in favor of that. I also point out that long-term the goal is to include lighting, which we would be opposed to. I don't really want a bunch of 60-foot light poles right outside my house turned on all the time. Just in conclusion, I'd like to point out that, again, this has been brought up just a few months ago, and it was pulled back because there was overwhelming opposition from the community for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Poole, and we are at 3451 Northborough Court. So we're kind of the other end of the area that Mr. Moffitt talked about. And we'll just kind of echo some of the same things there with regards to, we never knew about the December 18th, I think they said, meeting. And that could have been an oversight on our part, but apparently there has been a lot of community involvement saying this is not kind of acceptable there. But the bigger concern for us is on Northborough Court. There are some very big flooding and drainage issues, and I have no idea if this potentially would impact that, but we have several pictures here that show kind of what our backyard looks like after just a moderate rainstorm, and we're not talking about a huge multi-day event here. And, you know, the concern is if we have multiple parking lots and different things like that, is with the drainage issues that are currently there, is that just going to exacerbate kind of the pond in our backyard or the lake? We have about 2¼ acres, and, you know, at certain points there's about at least an acre and a quarter that's underwater. So I'd love to kind of have some sort of I just don't know how that works. Somebody to say, hey, this is going to impact it, it's not going to impact it. This feeds into, there's going to be another development situation to the east side of Northborough Court as well, on the horse farm there. And so we have multiple things that are going on currently that seem like it's going to detrimentally impact the neighborhood that we live in. So I would just kind of second as far as the concerns there for that. He gave some great recommendations as far as potentially looking at individual school locations, and but that's just the input for that. Thank you.
Mr. Poole, you just look like you brought some pictures. Would you like to share those with the board?
Sure, absolutely.
And if you don't mind, can you, I'm just curious, can you point out on that map where you are?
So we are in right down the corner of the
Okay.
street.
All right. Thank you.
So these are from a couple of separate different storms, but again, it happens pretty frequently. We don't take pictures every time.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leanne Clark. I live at 1103 Bella Vita Place. It's off of Siegel Road. My kids have been playing soccer since they were 5 here in Murfreesboro. And so I'm here on behalf of families to say that the need for these fields is very real. And the need for more than 6 fields is very real in the Murfreesboro area. I'm part of a new club that's just, we're in our 2nd year here in Murfreesboro called the Murfreesboro FC Youth Club. We have 7 teams right now, and the city has been working with us, but they have us over for the most part for our practices at McKnight Park. McKnight Park, those fields are shared with lacrosse and football and cricket's forming. And so the demand for space, for park spaces, is growing more and more every year here in Murfreesboro. Over at Siegel, I'm sure you're aware, with those fields, they've had to protect the turf from overuse. So they, too, have a need. And I think there's some people from MSC here to talk about that as well. So the need from, I guess, a soccer family is, this is a great solution. I know, too, the Parks and Rec are looking at the schools. We need those in addition. And as they look on down the road to another park, perhaps on the other side of town, that's also needed. I live over at Siegel, so when school's in session, I just have to make do while there's, traffic in the road. And so I think they're just pluses and minuses as we develop in Murfreesboro to meet the needs of residents. And I very much, I guess, am supportive of this variance to allow these practice fields to happen and to happen quickly. One of the issues with where practice is happening now, some are behind the church at First Methodist and different places. If fields are not smooth, then kids break their ankles and stuff because, they're just holes in the ground. So we have a lot of green space around, but it needs to be green safe. That's space that's safe for our kids to do all kinds of sports on. So I'm in support of the variance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rob Mitchell, 3450 Northborough Court. Erica's my next door neighbor, and so is Barbara. I'm in a unique position because I have lived on both sides of Siegel. I lived off of Cherry Lane for several years and experienced the growth and the traffic jams that the other gentleman experienced, and it is terrible on a Saturday to try to get out of your neighborhood when you have cars overfilling the parking lot and parking on the street. I do not know if there has been a sufficient hydrology study done to determine which direction the water will flow, but the area, as you can see from the aerials right over there, where it's located and directly to the east of that is a glade area. I'm not sure if Murfreesboro has taken actions to protect the glade or if they are prepared to mitigate the destruction of a glade area and take care of it elsewhere. The way that the water flows is to the east, down across a horse farm, and because Northborough Court subdivision was never completely finished when it was built back in the 80s, it will back up across a horse farm and it will back in. It backs into Barbara's yard. It backs into several other neighbors' yards. So my concern is that with the development of that large area right there, you're going to place additional burden on the current hydrological flow. And I don't know if that's been studied or addressed, but I'd be in opposition to having it located back there. I understand that there will not be lights, but I have seen no plans for placing the regulated Murfreesboro zoning landscaping around the peripheral properties either, to abate the noise and provide a barrier to that. So I would hope that you would take that into consideration if you are going to move forward, but I don't think it would be in the best interests of the neighborhood or the community to continue with having it there.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
I'm Steve McNabb. I live at 3577 Liana Road, which is directly across from the Jordan Farm. There's a couple of things that I think needs to be addressed before it should be approved. The traffic situation out there on Liana Road and Cherry Lane is awful. When they come off of Thompson Lane and by my house, it's about a mile straight stretch. And you can imagine what that is. It's like a racetrack. Cherry Lane is way too narrow to have more excess traffic. I know when they have this 200 soccer team field tournament that big buses and everything else come up and down that road. And like this gentleman said here, it'll back up for a quarter to a half a mile on trying to turn off of Liana or from Cherry Lane on to Liana. There needs to be, I think the roads need to be addressed. Put the extra traffic, this extra traffic gets on there. And also back there where they're wanting to put that, the city can't actually run water without flooding the houses that face Cherry Lane and back up to that. It's a swamp. Back there is all it really is on that part of it. And something else I'd like to say is when the city, I've been out there for 37 years, and when the city bought that property, Joe Kirshner, of course I know he's not any longer with the city, he promised us that there wouldn't be anything but water spread on that farm. That's what he told us at the meeting, and Carl David Summers is sitting back here and he can vouch for it. Now some of these other people that hadn't been there as long as we have probably can't. But I think it needs to be looked in some more. And another thing that concerns me, I've got a contract with the city to keep the hay cut off this property. Of course, back there where they're going to be, there's only one field, probably about 8 or 10 acres, that I actually cut hay off of. And I have to have workman's comp and liability insurance. And the thing that concerns me is, you know how these kids are about four-wheeling and cutting donuts. How is the city going to be able to keep those people off the property where I've got a contract that I pay them for so much of the hay that I take off of that? And I'm concerned, you know, that's one of my concerns. You know, I think they need to consider the safety, the water. They're going to have to do something about the draining, because I'm telling you, the 4th of July, I have some big tractors, and you can't hardly drive them back there on part of that without getting stuck. I'm not talking about going back there in a pickup truck or a car, but I'm talking about 100 horsepower tractors will sink up. So I guess that covers all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McNabb.
My name's Anthony Fulton. I live at 1203 Cherry Lane. My wife and I live in the swamp. That's where we live. That's where the water goes, right through the back of our property. We've already had problems with water cannon failures and flooding, and had the water department out looking at that. With that being said, I have talked a couple of times to Mr. Anthony, and the sign was put up last summer and was taken down. When I called him, the sign was still up, and he assured me that it was going to be taken down because of all the opposition. But the fact that really impressed me was that he was in fear of his life getting out to put the sign up because of the traffic. And when I say traffic, I don't mean just cars. We've got dump trucks, we've got trash trucks. Now we have 18-wheelers since the building trade is blooming again. And it's amusing to sit in the front yard and watch them try to turn off Cherry Lane onto Cider Drive to go back to Liberty. The road's not big enough. When you're coming down Cherry Lane, if you meet any type of vehicle like I just mentioned, it's pretty much closing one eye and aiming and hoping for the best, because there's no room there at all. And the reason that we know that is because we've been awakened to lights at night from wreckers pulling them out of our front yard. Because once you go off, if you make a foot one way or the other, you're in the ditch, and that's where you're going to stay. And I repair my mailbox on a constant basis because of these very things. So we're concerned about the traffic. This gentleman talked about how the traffic backs up on Cherry Lane. It backs up in front of our house to Cider Drive. Seen it. Can't get out of your driveway. There's been times that I've wanted to go across and get my mail and can't go get my mail because of the traffic. Turn around and you go back. So there's a lot of things to consider here. Water being one of them, it is an issue there. And we talked about the flat areas. I can't see those fields being in place without them being built up and graded, just like they are down the road. And when you do that, the water's got to go somewhere. So where does it go? It goes to the lowest point, my backyard. So with all those things considered, me and my wife both are strongly against it. We're not strongly against children playing soccer. But just for instance, we know when every goal is scored at Siegel Park. We know on Thursday evening when the band starts practicing at Siegel. When Miller Coliseum has the tractor pulls, we can sit in the house and we know when they take off. All of that, to me, is an invasion of our privacy, really. These soccer fields here will be closer than that. So there's a lot of things to weigh out, and we know that, but we just hope that you consider the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton.
My name is Helene Guida. I live at 1047 Cherry Lane. The proposal backs right onto my farm. The extension of Cherry Lane, or the widening of Cherry Lane, goes right through the front of my property, which is nothing but swamp. When it rains, I have 3 to 4 feet of water down my driveway, all the way to Cherry Lane as it exists. I agree 100% with everyone else that has spoken prior to me. I believe that now, insofar as I am concerned, last year when you all tried to push this through under the pond scum, and I'm being kind, ladies and gentlemen, I never knew about it. This year, I never knew about the meeting at Siegel School that was noted in December. The only thing I received was this dated January 15th, probably by accident. I am the one that is most, in addition to some of these other people, impacted by these fields. B, Cherry Lane. Nobody bothers to tell anybody, especially someone that is in the main access to said expansion and has her cows to put up with said children. I believe there's more than enough soccer fields in Murfreesboro for the soccer people, and yes, I do really realize it is a money-making procedure for the city and the soccer people. But I am vehemently opposed. I have a farm. I have the only farm left in that area, and I intend to keep it a farm by whatever means necessary legally to do so. So it was behoove, in my humble opinion, the city to renegotiate, purchase something elsewhere, because where you're going is nothing but water. If you wanted to walk through that field right now, you would be at least 12 inches sloshing through water. And therefore, I agree with everyone else, except the one person that wants the soccer fields. But I don't believe we need the soccer fields. I can hear them very clearly. I can hear the Siegel School, and I can hear the horse barn. Because I back into the horse barn, and the entire length, that back length of where you're planning on putting these fields. So I would strongly suggest that you all find some money in your pocketbooks to put these extra fields elsewhere. And please let us be a neighborhood the way we have bought our homes and were promised by the city. And the only reason that many of us agreed to the water department going on or going in there was that no one would build anything there. It would remain the way it is right now for eternity. Thank you all.
How's it going? My name's Nicholas Mangrum. I live that's my house right there, 3724 Liana Road. The original fields were to be put right here, directly behind my house and across the subdivision. I was also not told about any of this. I found out from a friend at church that they were proposing this. So I was like, okay, that's news to me. So I contacted Lanny, who, for the record, has been fabulous with communication and giving me good information and being respectful us as a community. I am completely for growth in a community, okay? That's what's made Murphysboro what it's become. But at the end of the day, you have to be cautious of the development that you do, okay? Like I said, with everyone that's got up here and talked, the biggest problems I see with the fields, it's not the kids. I have two young boys of my own. I have a 7-year-old and a 1.5-year-old that play soccer. We play at McKnight Park, and it's fabulous. But the lady got up and she spoke in favor for the fields because she lives on Siegel. But the traffic is manageable on Siegel because they have turning lanes and shoulders, and they have dual lanes to where when someone's trying to get over, they can get around. Liana and Cherry Lane, as everyone said, we do not have that benefit. We barely have white and yellow lines that you can see. I do strongly feel that when this was brought up last May, is when I found out about it. I went to Lanny, and Lanny came out him and his wife came out that evening to my house. We sat in my backyard and looked at it and talked about it. And I mirrored the same thing that they said about the Porta Johns and the gravel parking lots. Lanny listened, did what a lot of us on Liana had requested, that if this is a must, this must be done better. This is not a temporary thing. It's not gravel. It shouldn't be porta-johns and done distastefully. Lanny came back with, I actually sent Lanny a drawing of this, and they looked at it, liked it, and I guess they adjusted it. Chris did, and he said, Nick, what do you think? I said, I think it looks wonderful. If it has to go. At the end of the day, I am a homeowner. I can only have so much power. That is tenfold better than what it was. I still do not want it because there's still been no road study. I went last night, I went and spoke to several of the neighbors across the street and who can't be here because it's a 1 o'clock meeting on a Wednesday when people are working. And to answer a lot of people's questions that didn't know about any of these hearings, I didn't know about any of them. And the reason why you got a letter in the mail on January 15th is because I, at the last meeting at Siegel Sports Complex, I raised a cane about it. I said, where's my letter? They said, we sent everyone certified letters. I said, show me. They couldn't show me. They didn't even realize that we were county and this property is city. So the whole farm is city. We surrounding it are county. So when they sent their letters out to everybody, it went to the city. Not us. Not that they were affected. And so if I and some of my neighbors wouldn't have stood up and said something, we'd have probably had this field started last year with gravel and 16 porta-johns. Again, Lanny's been fabulous in every aspect of this, but I don't think enough people have looked at this off of paper. It looks good on paper. It sounds good on paper. Murfreesboro, I think the study is since 2014, Murfreesboro's grown by 62,138 people. That's fabulous. But at the end of the day, when you do growth, you can't become Nashville. I moved to Murfreesboro in 2004 to get away from that. Our first home was in Blackman, which we still fall in love with Blackman, but we still go to church out there. But when we found the house, we loved it. Because when you drive down Liana Road at nighttime, you can hear a pin drop. It's quiet. There's no hoodlum. There's no craziness out there. It's an older community. People have established homes and livelihoods out there. And yes, I can't tell you how many people on a Saturday ride bicycles down my house, which I love seeing that. But now you're going to introduce 200 soccer moms that are distracted by kids that want their Happy Meal or whatever they want. There is no shoulder. It's an immediate drop-off. Off Cherry Lane where they're talking about the swamp, it's not just a drop-off, it's a 3 to 4 to 5 foot drop-off. There are no street lights on Liana or Cherry. We like it like that. That's why you move into the county. When you want to be in this kind of area that has fields and restaurants, you move over off Memorial or off Siegel or off Thompson Lane because it's already there. But when you buy a house in the county, you don't expect this to be thrown up. The biggest opposition I had was the lights. Because as everyone has said, on a Friday night or a Thursday night or a Saturday night, you can hear the band clear as absolute day at Siegel High School. But when I bought the house, I knew that was there. And I was fine with that. But now you're introducing lights where young kids are going to be out much later than young kids need to be out. If these are practice fields, why do kids need to be out in the summertime? It gets dark at 8 o'clock. Why do lights need to be on after that? Kids should be home. I don't get that. When we asked at the Siegel complex, the soccer complex, there were probably 3 neighbors that showed up to that because no one knew about it. And that's the city letting us down. That's what that is. That's y'all letting us down, or the engineers or whoever was hired to do this, because none of us knew about it. And if a lot of us wouldn't have caused us to think about it, no one would have known about it. We've never been told or presented with an estimate for hours of operation or their plans. When is this going to be open? Soccer season is September through November, and March to May? Is that the only time it's going to be open, or is it going to be open in summertime? If it's open in summertime, is it going to be open till 8:30 when it gets dark? Well, September to November and March to May, that's school season. So if we have lights, are the kids going to be out practicing till 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 at night? I have 2 kids who we have to bathe and feed, and if they have soccer 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, getting them to bed, and most of us have kids, they need sleep. So the point of, in a community, if you haven't driven through the community at nighttime, I recommend you do that. Because it's not cars everywhere, it's very quiet. Now, when high school lets out, like he said, Liana becomes Liana Speedway, and kids go flying through there. And because the dump is over there, and Liana Swamp is where a lot of school buses take, a lot of your dump trucks, 18-wheelers, and construction debris vehicles take Cherry Lane to get to the dump. And the dump closes at 4 o'clock. So when they're heading out and coming back, they're now competing with school buses on Cherry Lane. And if you, like I said, if you have not been on Cherry Lane, I recommend you go out there and you go measure a dump truck and a school bus and see how they add up. I can't tell you the amount of wrecks on Liana Road, people just dipping off or missing a turn because there is no shoulder. I think if we're going to look at inviting 100 more vehicles on a Tuesday night for practice of distracted drivers, of having kids in the back seat, I think we're creating and we're asking for more problems. There's no street lights, so if you don't know the road, you don't know that on Liana Road that big sharp turn pops up. You don't know there's no shoulder and it's a pure drop-off. People move to the county for a reason. I truly feel that development should be done, but it needs to be done tastefully. It needs to be done neighborly, and there's nothing else in that area like that. In a pure, yes, down at the Siegel Soccer Complex, you're talking about the Memorial Boulevard. It's got big turning lanes. It's more built up. There's a Publix down the road. It's built up for that. You're dropping this in the middle of a pure residential community. I can't stress it enough that Lanny did exactly what I and a lot of people asked him to do. And if this is an absolute must, it has to go through. I think that's a good looking plan. But I cannot express to you the percentage of against this I am. Because when I sit on my back porch with my kids and they're playing, I don't want to look out and see that many people driving and standing that close to my property. I think when the lights show up, I think we now have security issues because we're inviting that many more vehicles on our roads when most of us are getting ready for bed. I think it's easy to get up here and say we're in favor for it if we already live off roads that have turning lanes and that have red lights. And if you've never went down Liana to turn on to Thompson Lane about 5 o'clock, I strongly invite you doing that. If you're turning right, you're good to go. If you're turning left, you're there for 10 minutes, let alone the 20 cars back. I think when the 5 lane comes through, if it does come through, we can't really fight that to a point. Then we look at doing something like this. But until that 5 lanes through there, why rush this? My son went to preschool at First United Methodist.
Sir, I'm going to inference for everyone else.
Yes, sir, I understand.
If you could wrap it up.
I understand. Sorry, it's a very passionate issue for me. Again, this is my home. This is the community I live in. This is where my babies are going to be raised. I'm all for the community growing 100%. I just think development needs to be done with every T crossed and every I dotted. And I just feel that through the water drainage, through the traffic, through the red lights, through the no shoulder, through the no turning lane, through the security lights, through just everything, the poor information to all the residents, I just don't feel that the city has done justice for us to inform us through every aspect to clear stamp this. I would invite you to put yourself in a homeowner's perspective and look at it from that way. I appreciate your time, and I hope you consider it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Marshall Campbell. I live at 4123 Lazarus Way. I'll preface this, I don't live in the area in question. My son has played soccer there for 3 years with the Murfreesboro Strikers. I'm also the U11 boys team manager. So part of my charge is to find fields for two purposes: practices and friendlies. If you don't know about soccer, friendlies are supposed to be the nice games that we play in between tournaments. In the past 2 years, we have practiced at McKnight Park in the grassy area on the previous slide at the corner of DeJarnett and Memorial. We have practiced at Old Fort on the old softball field. We have practiced at Walter Hill, both in the front grassy area on the corner of West Jefferson Pike and Lebanon Road, and on the softball field in the back part of the property. And we have actually had a couple of practices at Siegel Soccer Park. Our opportunity to practice at Siegel Soccer Park has been rare, and the reason is because of the number of teams that exist today. We haven't practiced at Siegel Soccer Park in over a year because of the number of teams and just the fact that you can't get them all scheduled in a time frame to be able to get kids home, especially on school nights. Soccer around here is a year-round sport now. It's not a September to November. It's not a school year sport. It's a year-round sport. The additional soccer fields are a necessary next step to grow the sport in the city with the number of kids that are playing it and adults that are playing it today. I can't say that this specific property is the answer, but this is a necessary first step to try to create the number of fields necessary to accommodate everyone. We had just our team last fall. We had 2 injuries on the practice fields at Old Fort because of the condition of the field. It's good for playing softball if you've got to run every 10 or 15 seconds, but if you've got to run end to end, it is not a field conducive to a sport that does that. But that's where we have to practice because of the lack of availability of fields. So I would ask you to consider this as a necessary first step to the number of soccer fields that are needed in this county. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
My name is Carl David Summer. I live at 3669 Liana Road. Just a few comments, and first off, I'd like to compliment Mr. Lanny Goodwin for his listening to those of us who were talking to him. I found out the project was a possibility. I called him. He came to my house. Another neighbor was home. They came over. We talked. A few weeks later, we met again. There was about, 6 or 7 families living both on Liana and Cherry Lane. We addressed some other concerns. Those concerns, with one exception, have all been met. I'm like Mr. McNabb over here. I've been there 37 years. For the first 26 years, I received my mail at a P.O. box. I finally decided it must not be temporary. I'd go and put up a mailbox. I'm on my 4th mailbox now, and it's simply the lack of shoulders. There have been numerous accidents. There's been more than those 4 people in my yard at various times, but the rest of them missed the mailbox somehow. I don't know how, but they missed it. But there was a young lady making a left turn onto Allen Road in a convertible that was T-boned by a motorcycle that the speedometer was pegged at 117 miles an hour. Believe it or not, that lady survived. I don't know how, but she did. So there are lots of traffic issues, and I tell you where they come from, because I kept seeing my nephews go by, this a few years ago, and I knew where they lived, and I said, why are you coming by my house to get to school? And they said, because we're coming from Walter Hill, and we don't want to have to come through the elementary and the middle school to get to the high school. So they cut down Cherry and they cut across, and he very plainly told it right. It is referred to by many people as Liana Speedway, and that's no joke. Ask the guys that were trying to pour concrete for my front driveway. I found them sitting down that morning, and I went out and I said, "What are y'all doing?" And they said, "We're waiting for these kids to get to school where we can get to work, so we can't work under these conditions." So my biggest disappointment in the project is simply that we don't have turn lanes. Cherry Lane probably is maybe a little more narrow than Liana, but neither of them have any. You don't have a shoulder. People drop off. You can drive down through there right now today, and you'll see the tracks where cars or trucks have left the road, and at some point they can enter back onto the road sometimes, unless they tore up too much. So, but I think Mr. Goodwin did a good job. As I told him out there one day, my comment's still the same. I'm not opposed to soccer at all. Just want you to fine-tune this thing, and I realize that those are county roads that we're asking you to get a turn lane from. But I didn't understand the comment earlier that said you'd have to get right-of-ways. Where I would have thought that driveway would be going in, the city already owns the property. I don't know who else they need to get a right-of-way. And maybe there's more to the design that I know anything about, but I think it is a needed use for that property. I just want to see people getting in and out of there safely, and that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Summer.
My name's Thomas Parkerson, and I live at 2814 Cherry Blossom Lane in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I have 3 children, and 2 of them play soccer with. They played the YMCA. They've played. We played 1 goal. We now have a child playing in Murfreesboro Soccer Club, and I don't live. Cherry Blossom Lane is kind of off Siegel Road. It's not Cherry Lane that we're talking about, but what I want to stress and express with my concerns, and I've got some concerns, but I've also got some things I want to say that are, I think, beneficial in support of the project. I absolutely agree with these homeowners with the issues that they're bringing up with respect to a couple of things. And I don't know all the facts, but here's what, if one of the gentlemen said, put yourself in my shoes, and I'm going to, okay? If I'm in his shoes and there is such a flooding issue over there, then that is something that certainly needs to be looked at, if it hasn't already. I imagine with a project of this nature, it probably has been taken into account, and maybe he just didn't address that in the front end. But if it has not, that has got to be looked at. You've got homeowners that have lived here for years that say there's 2 or 3 feet of water in this area, and coming from an area where I used to live, there was a flooding issue on the other side of town. When a project is put in, it certainly can impact other areas because the water's got to go somewhere. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed if it has not already. The second issue that I think is a key concern that they bring up that is a huge factor is the traffic. The road itself and the number of potential accidents, the mailbox issues, I think those are all valid concerns for a property of this nature. I don't know the studies. I don't know whether this has occurred over, the gentleman said he'd been there for 30-something years, and after 20 years he put a mailbox up. Or I don't want to put words in his mouth, but after a long time he put the mailboxes up and he's gone through 4 in potentially 15 years or something like that. That's concerning. If those issues are addressed or they're looked into, I'm going to segue into why this is needed. Murphysboro has grown, whether we like it or not, we live in this community. It has grown to such a population over the last 15 or 20 years. When I went to college here briefly in the 90s, it's not even the same town. It's a different town, but we've grown the right way. Just today in the paper, I saw that there was 250 more jobs that are coming in, white-collar jobs, bringing in families. Why do these people move here? These people move here because of education. They move here because we provide services. They move here because of, believe it or not, athletics. A lot of these communities that are moving into this community do this because there are facilities that support the community. The Murfreesboro soccer complex. People didn't want that complex for a long time, but once the Siegel complex went in, and I've been all over the state. I've coached soccer and played soccer all over the South, and it is one of the best facilities in the South, if not definitely in the state. The only one that rivals it is a facility in Memphis, and this is better than facility in Memphis. What has it done for the community? It has brought in millions of dollars, and these individuals have extreme valid concerns they're concerns, but they also reap the benefit of these facilities. They reap the benefit of, I know a lot of the individuals say, well, if we wanted to hear those things, we'd move into the city. I live in the city. I live right off Siegel Road. I can hear every football game. I can hear every, and even when I lived in an apartment complex across there, I could hear those things. That's just part of our community where we live. Things happen. You hear these things. So the biggest concern that I would have if I'm putting myself in their shoes would be those issues with the flooding and the traffic. Now, with respect to looking out and seeing these things in my backyard, yeah, I don't know that I would like that one way or another. But when you look at what the city is trying to do to offset and work with their concerns, you've got an individual who's met with people that have had issues, and the ones that he has not met with, I know he will. And the city has apparently moved the complex from one area to another area in concerns for the community, for concerns with the traffic, not the traffic, but the number of residential homes in those communities. So going back to, I know I'm getting a little off track, but going back to the need for this, if you look at this community and the growth that's occurring, and you look at not just soccer, but you look at the facilities and things that we're providing for our community, it is needed. Now, just as the gentleman said before, maybe this isn't the place, but it has to happen. And here's another reason why. Those facilities on the soccer complex where Siegel is, you can't practice in a lot of those facilities because they tear the fields up. You can play on those facilities, but if you want to hold tournaments there, there's only a very limited area of soccer places that you could practice on. So that's why they're moving these practices to other areas. Here's a problem that's happening in Nashville right now. Nashville is one of the biggest growing areas in the country with respect to a lot of things, but they're having a major problem with soccer and with practice facilities, with a place to hold things. And the reason that's happening, they're moving to Murfreesboro. There are clubs that are coming to Murfreesboro out of Nashville because they see the growth opportunity. If we want to keep Murfreesboro growing and going in the right direction, and I think it's a positive thing. I completely agree. Think the growth has been done in a tactful way. I think that we need to think about these issues that they bring up, address every concern we possibly can, and don't start the project until those concerns have been addressed. And every one of these individuals have been talked to about those concerns. And then at that point, make a decision on if this is the best place for this to happen. It needs to happen. And that's what I'll leave the committee with. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Jason Morrison. I live at 1312 McDuff Drive, Murphysboro. I too am concerned about all the valid points that the residents around this proposed complex share. I'd mainly like to speak to why I affirm the need of practice fields. And I don't want to reiterate what everyone has already said who's in affirmation of it, but an additional thing is there's a benefit to centralized location of these fields. I'm a parent of 4 kids, and all 4 are involved in this soccer program. And so when practices are, and we try to do a good job of, I'm on the board of MSC. We've tried to do a good job, I think, with the city of keeping those outside locations close to the complex, but it's as a coach also, it's hard to make, you're working, you have certain nights you can coach the kids. And so I've been at Scales Elementary, I've been at Siegel, I've been at First United Methodist, I've been at another elementary school, and it's difficult to try to get all your kids to a certain location when you don't always have control over what nights they practice. And so having your kids at a centralized location is nice, and it's a nice benefit. One issue that was spoken of too was the lateness of kids being out. Well, that's true to some degree during certain seasons, but in the fall when it gets dark at 5, there's really not the possibility hardly of any practices being done, in daylight because of school hours. And so we're really limited in that sense because we're limited as a city in how many fields we have lit. And that's part of this issue too, is we're limited in the use of the fields as they currently are. And some of the fields are lit and some of them are not. And so the benefit of these extra fields is greatly needed. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Anthony, I've got several things that I have written down. There's several things I think that we need to address. I think there's some common threads or themes that have been brought up. I'm going to let you try to tackle them to a degree, and then if I see that there are some that I saw that we haven't addressed, we'll bring up those along with what the commission members might have too. So do you want me to start, or okay?
I'm ready.
So
I'm ready. Sorry.
We'll start with the drainage issue. I saw our city engineer in here a minute ago, but I don't see him anymore. Oh, there he is. I know as part of being on the planning commission, we usually talk about drainage issues at site plan, and I realize that's at site plan approval, and I realize that's not part of the Board of Zoning Appeals process or responsibility, but I do think we need to talk about that. I do think that we need to make these people aware of the processes that we go through as a city to make sure that they understand that, we shouldn't be at least not increasing any more water on their property, and hopefully as part of this study we would help mitigate part of their problem, but I'll let you address that issue.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pro Tem Halliburton, members of the BZA, Sam Huddleston, City Engineering Department. We do, as Mr. Halliburton mentioned, we do look very closely at the site plan stage, at the drainage patterns. We ask the developer, in this case be the city of Murfreesboro, and their design team to look at that with staff. We'll certainly examine that. I've looked generally at the drainage patterns here for the proposed soccer fields. It appears to me that they're going to be headed to the northeast under the existing Cherry Lane. There's an existing stream that crosses under Cherry Lane and Abigail Court. The other thing I would say is that soccer fields in general would have a runoff characteristics similar to agricultural fields, pasture. They're not really high runoff areas like parking lots or roadways or shopping centers. And I certainly think that the design team, we've worked with them before, but they'll be very capable in helping us mitigate any drainage concerns there. There was a comment, I think, Mr. Halliburton, about Northborough Court, and based on my review of the proposed plan, this appears to be outside the drainage basin that drains into the Northborough Court area. And I would certainly look for the design team to confirm that for me, but that's my belief at this point.
I would hope that as part of this process, if we're going to look at it, even though this field and the construction of may not have any direct effect on North Borough Court, I would say that our property, meaning when I say our property, the city of Murfreesboro's property, somehow, even though it may have been that way all along, is impacting, along with the man upstairs, is impacting North Borough Court. If we can help them in any way as part of this process, I think that's something we need to do.
It's certainly a good point. We can't change rainfall patterns. Those things obviously are out beyond our control. But we can change how we respond to those things. North Borough Court's been an area for some time, and really not just North Borough Court, but a lot of the area north of Thompson Lane. Part of our struggle through there is that a lot of that's private property. We don't have easements or rights to be on those properties to make improvements. Sometimes the owners don't want us to make changes to those undeveloped tracts, and so when we can work the best is when there's a willing developer or willing property owner. But I do hear your message, Mr. Halliburton, and engineering will look at this with the Parks and Rec Department and their design team, and we'll take a comprehensive look at the Jordan Farm there, including North Borough Court and the impact of the soccer fields as that comes through for site plan review.
Will the gradation of the field make any impact on the drainage as it was prior to the fields being built?
It will make local changes, and by that I mean it will modify drainage patterns there where the soccer fields are, but their plan will be to limit how much work they have to do, and their plan will also work with the existing drainage patterns regionally in the neighborhoods, in the communities, in the areas between, say, Thompson Lane and Cherry Lane, Liana Road, and in the properties to the east, existing Siegel Soccer Park. The design team and the Parks and Rec Department and the City of Murfreesboro Engineering Department don't want to significantly change the existing drainage patterns to direct water where it wasn't going before. So there will be some local changes, and by that I mean just around the field area and the parking lot areas, but those will be those changes will be managed to maintain the existing drainage patterns.
And this may not be a question for you, but the parking lot itself, will it be, what materials will be used? Are those permeable substances, or it's not blatantly obvious from the plans?
Yes, our zoning ordinance requires off-street parking to be a hard, dustless surface, and that can compromise a lot of materials, concrete, asphalt. It can be the permeable pavers. As you suggested, we do try to stay away from just base gravel because it is such a tough maintenance problem for us, and in the summer months can create a problem in managing dust. So I'm not anticipating that to be a gravel surface, but whether the parking lot itself is a permeable or impermeable surface, the overall plan would manage any increases in runoff from that property.
It being impermeable.
That's correct.
I would add, I just pulled up the site layout, which if they want to put it up on the screen, but it does indicate asphalt pavement for the parking area and then the bituminous surface for the driveway.
I recall now from your previous statements.
I understood when the presentation was made that it would be at least 950 feet away from the neighborhood. Did I hear that right?
That's correct. The closest home on Cherry Lane, which is directly north of the fields, is approximately 950 feet away. The closest home to the west is 1,600 feet away on Liana, and the closest home on Northbrook to the south is 1,300 feet away. And to speak to the drainage, we have designed it with infiltration green drainage treatments. So we are not increasing the runoff from this site. The property right now has approximately 20 feet of elevation change. So we're grading it to flatten the property, so we're actually going to reduce the rate, even though it's pasture now versus groomed turf. We're flattening the slopes to 1.5%. So that will slow down some of the runoff. And as Mr. Huddleston said, we have to match pre-development and post-development flow rates, which we will be doing, but we also have to treat the parking lot runoff, which is a state requirement. So we will be filtering through the bioswales. We're doing the water before it enters there's a stream. He's correct that it's really a ditch. It's not a free-flowing stream that runs to the northeast and under Cherry Lane. So we're not taking any water towards Northbrook at all.
So I'm going to go through some of the questions that I heard, and while you're up there, this one would be for you, or not for you, but maybe you can answer. If I'm looking at this correctly, and I'm looking at C102, and it says future building on the, I guess would be the west side.
Yes, sir, that's shown here.
So is that the bathroom?
Yes.
Okay. So is there any, why not, and I haven't been privy to any conversations, so I'm just going to ask the question, why is it in the second phase and why is it not part of the original project so that there are not any porta potties, as Mr. Moffitt brought up?
Currently, the sewer, the city sewer stops at the corporate limits, which is back where the Cherry Lane transitions from the improved Cherry Lane down to the old county. That's where the sewer stops. So we do not have sewer service at this time. With the extension of Cherry Lane, more than likely sewer service will be extended along with that.
Okay. So those porta potties would be up until Cherry Lane is extended, is in essence what we're saying?
I would say approximately 2 years. If Cherry Lane extension does begin construction in 2018, remember, this project started much earlier, so we had hoped to move into construction this spring where we could install sprigs in June. Because of the extended public input process and everything, it's likely these fields will not be open until at the earliest the spring of 2017 or the fall of 2017.
All right. One of the questions I think Mr. Mitchell brought up, and I haven't seen this, but I'm not at the Siegel Soccer Complex, but would really cause me some pain is if, he mentioned that there was parking on the street when there's big tournaments going on. So I'm hoping that we've got a long way in here as the first phase, but as when Cherry Lane is finished out or completed, I'm hoping that we've got ample parking so that we don't have any parking in the street.
Yes, for a practice facility with 6 fields, we've provided over 200 spaces.
Okay. All right. Another, Mr. Mitchell, I believe, brought this up, which I think has got some merit. What about a landscaping plan? Do we have a landscaping plan? Is that part of our what we're looking at here?
Yes, sir. We met the requirements. We provided landscaping along the temporary access drive where we adjoined the homeowners. We did not add additional screening around the complex because there's existing fence rows almost extensively around where the soccer fields are being built, and we're not taking those trees out.
So if you were a guessing man, back to kind of the Planning Commission piece, the existing tree rows, what would you think those buffers are today? An A, B, C? Or do you know what I'm speaking of?
To be honest, I couldn't answer that question, but you can see in this particular, this is a heavy fence row, heavy vegetation here, cluster here. There's existing trees here, but we're augmenting those per your standards.
Okay.
I don't know if my staff did an A, B, or C.
Right.
But we are adding landscaping here to enhance in this area. And I would think maybe the Parks Department, if you felt we needed to add a few more evergreens around the perimeter, that might be something we could entertain.
Well, I think that we, at minimum, if this is approved, that we need to be in agreement of what that buffer, we define what that buffer would be. Because we would do that with any other project
Sure.
that would come before the Planning Commission.
Well, we would intend to honor your design code 100%.
Okay. I'm going to leave the best for last. Hours of operation. Of course, there was a gentleman that spoke that specifically talked about, since we're not going to have lights, at certain times of the year, we can't do it past 5 o'clock, but give us an idea. So is it strictly based upon the sunlight how this would work?
In the first phase, it would be based on, it would close at dark, similar to our greenways. However, we would extend it with lights. I know when we built Richard Siegel Park, we were under the understanding that lights wouldn't stay on past 10 o'clock. We try to adhere to that in all of our rules. Keep in mind that it's not little kids only that play soccer. We've got teenagers, adults. Practice facilities are in need for all demographics, not just the small children. Honestly, the little kids, they're easy to handle. It's the kids that are playing more competitive, the teenagers. And in this day and age, we're extremely happy and we're pushing to try to keep kids in sport longer. So by providing them this, they are able to stay out later, usually 8:30 during the summer. In the daylight savings time, park hours would close around 6:30.
Okay, thank you. So the last thing that I have on my list, and then I'll turn it over to any of the questions that the commission may have, is let's talk about traffic for just a minute. So I understood by the initial presentation in my question that Cherry Lane and the expansion of Cherry Lane could be happening, and it's on the radar within the next 3 years. Sounds like if this was approved, it's going to be a year and a half to 2 years before, or we'll say a year and a half, that would be used. So we're close to when hopefully Cherry Lane gets expanded. I'm just going to voice an individual concern. I haven't been down Cherry Lane in a while. There was a time in my life I was on it quite a bit. And if it hasn't changed since then, I think we need to have a discussion over if this road's not improved, what are we going to do if we can do anything on a temporary basis to improve the ingress and egress to these fields?
Well, I think with having heard all of that today, I think we would go back and have further discussions about, can we at least provide shoulders? The city owns several hundred feet of frontage on Cherry Lane, so we could possibly come, and I'll point it out. This is all Cherry Lane frontage. The problem is we're very close on this corner right here, so we're really limited probably to a couple of hundred feet when we might could make some shoulder improvements. We could definitely have a right turn and a left turn lane coming out of the complex. That's not a problem. It's keeping your road geometry correct. You would normally take right away on the north and the south side of the road if you were adding a turning. Otherwise, you have an abrupt jog. But we'll look at that and try to make improvements there.
Is there any thought, and I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but at least a right-hand turn lane, because that property is the city's property, or are we getting the cart before the horse with respects to the improvements that we know that we're going to make at a later date?
No, I think we should go back and look at least a right-hand in, even building out of a double bituminous temporary material would reduce that cost. And there's no, there could be as many people coming from Liana to Cherry Lane and making a right turn and may prefer to go that route.
Right.
If we provide a turning lane in that direction.
Okay.
And one comment that I heard that I wanted to speak to about the concern over four-wheelers and all, the project is going to be fenced. There'll be controlled access because if you've been out there, the water department has some internal fencing and the whole property is fenced. So there's no way for four-wheelers to get into this property, and we're not going to open that up. I should say there's no easy way.
Right.
Oh, and I did want to address the mailing issue. We sent out, and I have the receipts. We got a mailing list from the city. We did not realize the county and city line were right there. So some of the residents who live in the county were not on our list, and we apologize for that. But we did get a mailing list. We sent 84 and had 67 received responses to the public meeting.
Any other questions from the commission? Frank, you don't have any?
Has there been a traffic study by the city in that area, or is that something that am I speaking prematurely?
We have not looked specifically at the soccer park, Ms. King, but yes, there's been a big traffic study. We call it the Cherry Lane Project, that has looked at traffic patterns and road needs in this vicinity, including the feeder roads of Sulphur Springs and Liana. And we certainly recognize, and our major thoroughfare plan recognizes the need for improvements on Sulphur Springs Road a little bit further to the west, and then also on Liana Road as it intersects here with the realigned Cherry Lane. Those projects are on our major thoroughfare plan. The Sulphur Springs project's a little bit ahead of the Liana project, the way it appears right now. But yes, we've studied that. As the engineers represented here, we'll look very closely at traffic patterns and at the need for roadway improvements on Cherry Lane. I was a little bit confused. The original proposal had the access coming off Liana Road, but I see now that we're coming off of Cherry Lane, and we'll certainly look at that and evaluate the needs for roadway improvements where we can as this project moves forward through the site plan process.
What's the anticipated amount of traffic and when? As far as the use of these fields, what does the city anticipate the amount of traffic would be?
All right, I'll yield to the design engineer.
Well, as Thomas just said, the practice times are during the fall and spring are from after school until dark, till about 6 o'clock. My experience in designing parks is during that time period, there's a lot of carpooling going on because not a lot of parents are depending on one of the other parents to get their kids from school to practice and vice versa. Another group picks them up. So that's going to be the peak period in the spring and fall, would be immediately after school till dark. And keep in mind, too, they're moving some of the practice from Siegel Park to this. They're trying to get practice off of the game fields because the city spent over $250,000 this summer renovating the game fields because of so much practice play on the game fields. Thomas might could add more to that. I don't.
A good calculation would take the number of players that would actually be utilizing the field, about 15 players per field. You anticipate a lot of them do carpool, but a good estimate would be one car per player that would be on site. You get 2 practices a night, so you'd say 30 people per field throughout the entire day. So that would be about 30 cars per field times 6. You're looking at about 200 cars.
But that would be over
spread out into 2 different intervals. Typically, you'll get 2 practice times. Now, in the summer, we possibly could get 3 practice times, so it would be over a 3.5, 4-hour period.
I'm sorry, guys, but at public hearings,
The field and seawall will be done because of drainage. That's why it wasn't so much plain as it was plain on for drainage field. That's what they had to fix. They had to fix all the drainage in the field.
okay.
That's what they had to fix.
All right. Does the commission have any other questions for either the engineer or the representative of the applicant? Mr. Anthony, do you have anything to add to the application?
I do not.
Okay.
I was anticipating your series of questions for me, and I got off the hook very easy.
Okay. All right. All right.
I do need to add that my husband and I are close friends with Mr. and Miss Mangrum, and on a couple of occasions last year, I recall vaguely that both Kelly and Nick had voiced some concerns about this project to my husband and I, and I just wanted to disclose that. I have very little recollection of the specific details of what was discussed, and in fact it may have mostly been discussed with my husband and just shared with me. It was way before any mention of this came before the BZA. I was not very familiar with it to begin with at that time, but wanted to share that just as a matter of notice.
I'll start the discussion as part of this process. I think anytime that we are looking at trying to increase the recreation facilities for the city of Murfreesboro, and this is strictly my opinion, is a good thing. I forget now who the speaker was that made the comment that there are several reasons why the city of Murfreesboro is growing, and one of those reasons is the good work that Mr. Goodwin and his predecessor have done over the years with respects to the Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department. I'll be the first to say that I would be for more practice fields, soccer fields, because I definitely think that they are needed. My kids are way past that era in their life. However, we enjoyed using the city facilities when they were playing soccer, and I don't want to limit any child or any family from having that opportunity that we had as a family and as our family grew. I do have some individual concerns over not necessarily the layout of this, but the assurance with respects to drainage, and I do have some concerns over the traffic piece. I do understand that if improvements are going to be made to Cherry Lane and that they are on the city's radar screen in reference to improvements, that you wouldn't want, as a city taxpayer, we wouldn't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of money on improvements with respects to the road if we were going to turn around and just tear it up a year or two later. That doesn't make a lot of common sense. But I think that if it can be worked out, that some certain things that can be done on the front end of this thing and not be so costly when the entire improvements are made, then I'm for this application. I actually, just speaking for myself, I serve on the Planning Commission also, so I will have the ability to review this site plan and I just be one voice on the Planning Commission at that point in time, but I can definitely provide an opinion as to what improvements need to be made from the start and not at the end of this project. And so that's an assurance that I can make to the people that have addressed the traffic issue as part of this public hearing. Again, like I said, I'm one voice of 7 individuals. But we would have the opportunity to review it at site plan.
Well, I certainly think it's a good project, and I understand how the neighborhood feels, but it seems like to me the city has went above and beyond, to make sure that they're taking care of the drainage and even hopefully making some shoulders where the traffic will be a little better out there until they can complete the Cherry Lane project. So I'm for approving it.
Is that in form of a motion, or would you like to make a comment? Or
I think I agree with Mr. Halliburton's concerns with regard to traffic. I also would strongly suggest and hope that additional buffering efforts could be made just to reduce any noise impact on the surrounding communities. I'm not near Siegel, but I'm near Blackman, and I understand the sound of bands on Friday nights, and I don't mind it so much, but I moved into that, and so that's different than something moving into your area. So I think additional buffering is also something that I think would be important to add to this project as much as possible.
So do we have a motion?
I'll go on and make a motion to approve with any additional comments that's been made about the buffers and shoulders or whatever.
Do we need to clarify? I mean, and I'm not disagreeing with what Ms. Mosby made, but is that something that we would review at site plan, or are we making certain things being done as a condition of this approval? Mr. Ives, maybe I'm getting way out of bounds.
No, I think that's for the board to clarify.
Okay.
Normally, is my understanding, there's not a buffering requirement when it's like zoning. One zoning is compared to the other, so we've got this is all zoned RS-15, I believe, and so while we're carving out a use, we're not rezoning. We are at one point of this, we're adjacent to some other property where the proposal is to put buffering, and we of course do have some natural buffering that I understand is to stay where the old fence rows are, but it would not be normally required, let's say at the upper left soccer fields, on looking at the drawings ahead of in front of us here, would not normally be required to put buffering in at that place, because the zoning is the same. Is that Sam? Am I recalling that correctly?
That's correct, Mr. Ives. The Planning Commission, though, Mr. Halliburton does have the ability to review site plans to add buffering requirements at that stage for any use. There are some standard landscaping requirements, and then there are also buffering requirements. If you'll recall, the buffering, the least amount of buffering specified in our landscape ordinance is type A. The most restrictive is type E, and that type E would be used in a setting where, for example, heavy industrial use would be adjacent to a residential use, and then we expect that to be the widest buffer and the heaviest planted buffer. A typical buffer that we would see between a commercial use, which you might look at this and say it's akin to with traffic and noise and parking lots, would be a type D buffer. And that's a 12-foot wide buffer strip. with a certain amount of planning as specified in the ordinance. D and C. And what I think would help staff as we look at this at the site plan level is if your motion could include specifying what particular buffer standard that you would expect to meet using the A through E designation.
It is, Mr. Huddle said, the Planning Commission can impose buffer requirements at site plan, and I believe this board has the authority also to require buffers as a part of your approval. I was pointing out that it would not normally be required absent some special provision that you buffer between like zonings, but as part of a special use for this use within this zoning area, this board as well as Planning Commission can require buffering. I would just say that our former planning director said many times the greatest buffer is distance, and we are a substantial distance from the neighboring, from the other uses or from the residential uses, which in and of itself is a good buffer. This board certainly has can require additional buffering if it so chooses.
If I may, just looking at the buffering chart, the soccer fields are zoned P, and they are adjacent to an RS zone, so the mandatory buffering would be a type A buffer. Anything over that, certainly, as mentioned already, you can condition within your approval today.
Not being rezoned.
That's true.
The other, I was
because
looking
it's
at the wrong one.
use.
Yeah,
he's.
It's a special use, not a
That's
rezoning.
right. That's right. That's right. If it were being rezoned, it would be a type A.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, maybe I should change my motion to leave that to the site plan on the buffer. Because like you said, it is a distance away from the neighborhood.
I'll just give you my opinion. My opinion is I'd like to see us do a D in the areas that are adjacent to the neighborhoods that would already not qualify for a D. And what I mean by that, we've already pointed out that, I don't know what direction it is, say the southeast corner, to me that's probably already a D. So I'm getting a head shake, yes. Yeah. So what I'd like to see us do now is say we're going to do a D in any area that doesn't have the density already of a D that is adjacent to residential properties as part of the condition of our approval.
You agree with that?
I guess I would ask what you mean by adjacent.
Well, not necessarily. I in fact would think that there would need to be additional buffering surrounding the fields, and where there's not already a density of a D, that D buffering would need to surround it. And despite the fact that space is a good buffer, it doesn't necessarily keep the sound at bay the way, as we all know, when we remove the furniture from our homes, you get a lot more noise than when you have objects taking up that space. So I think as a noise barrier, it would be helpful to have a type D surrounding the fields.
I'm fine with that. So do you want to amend your motion to include a D buffer surrounding the fields?
I'm so confused now. I don't know what I'm going to do. Because I wasn't really thinking how far. 950 feet away from a neighborhood is a pretty good distance. So let me just make a motion to approve the special use permit as it is and leave it up to the site, when they start doing the site plan, to determine what buffer they need.
I think I would move to approve, but condition on including a type D buffer surrounding the fields.
Excuse me, I guess we should, if there's not a second, then...
Yeah, then we'll just make a, so
apparently the first motion died for lack of a second.
Correct.
So then now would be appropriate to have another motion. Sorry, pardon me for interrupting, Julie. But
No, that's why you're here.
We need all the help we can get.
I
would request that you allow that.
Sir,
public
you get to
hearing's
speak one time.
closed.
Thank you.
I would move to approve, conditioned upon a type D buffer surrounding the fields. In addition, additionally conditioned upon that's my shoulder improvements. I guess, Mr. Ives, is that something that we can condition?
I think that certainly the type D buffer, you make condition it on that. The shoulder improvements, though, I'm not sure where we're talking about, and that'd be, there's just to say shoulder improvements would be
It's too vague.
Yeah, I think so.
The requirements are what, an A buffer?
That would be the minimum requirement if
there was a
this
rezoning.
property, if the soccer field area was to be rezoned park and the rest of it stays zoned RS-15, then the minimum buffer requirement would be a type A.
So are you removing the?
Well,
All right.
I'm trying to think. I suppose I was attempting to make a motion that
Right.
included your comments.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I can.
I mean, we may have to, and I'm just talking out loud, we may have to address the roadway improvements at site plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that the Planning Commission, I'm not sure routinely is the right word, but pretty much routinely does whenever there's going to be a significant amount of traffic coming into or out of a place. They'll look at the need for left turn lanes, right turn lanes, other enhancements in order to make this a safe place for everyone.
Well, then I will restate my motion. If I would move to approve, conditioned upon a type D buffer surrounding the fields, as well as the buffer included in the plan on the temporary roadway to Cherry Lane.
I'll second that motion. All those in favor of the motion on the table say aye. Aye. All opposed? That special use permit with the buffer condition has been granted. We will move on to the next application, which is application Z16004 by Kim Mitchell, requesting a special use permit to allow an accessory apartment on property in the single-family residential district located at 3450 North Borough Court. Mr. Anthony.
Thank you, sir. Rob and Kim Mitchell wish to construct an accessory apartment behind their existing home at 3450 Northborough Court. The property is zoned RS-15, is approximately 2.3 acres in area, and sits at the end of a cul-de-sac. Let me pull up another exhibit here. The zoning ordinance requires a special use permit in order to construct an accessory apartment in a residential zone, and prescribes several standards for accessory apartments. The applicant attests that each of these standards will be met. Specifically, the principal structure will continue to be owned and occupied by the applicant, and the accessory apartment will be occupied by a relative. The accessory apartment will be located to the rear of the existing house and will be subordinate to the existing house. And the accessory apartment will not exceeds 700 feet of floor area. The unit that is shown in the exhibit provided by the applicant is 524 square feet in floor area. The applicant also attests that all of the general standards for obtaining a special use permit will be satisfied. If the board approves the special use permit request, staff recommends the following condition. The special use permit for an accessory apartment at 3450 Northborough Court shall lapse at such time that the ownership of the property is transferred. Staff can answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for staff? If not, Mr. Mitchell, are you representing this application?
Yes, sir. I'm back.
Go right ahead.
This the accessory dwelling that we're looking at putting is for my wife's elderly father who's disabled. We find ourselves in the situation, like many people are, of having to take care of elderly parents. We wanted to give him some sense of independence, so that's why instead of making heavy modifications to the interior of our house, we chose to locate a small dwelling. It'll probably be more in the range of 450 square feet. The exterior will match what is currently there. Since there is a drainage issue, as has been evidenced in the previous discussion with our lot, we're very cognizant of making certain that the small footprint is located in an area that does not impede or displace any water onto any additional neighbor or cause additional runoff. We would have hoped to have already had this in place, but he came to live with us a little bit quicker than we had anticipated. So we're right now interviewing builders and getting estimates on how much this is actually going to cost us. So we anticipate it would probably take no more than, once we have somebody, 90 days to get it completed.
Any questions for Mr. Mitchell?
Will there be an entryway into the home? I didn't see from the plans.
No, what we're going to do is locate it directly off of a walkway, which I don't know if you can pull up a photo again there. If you
the house, the photo.
Yeah, if you look at the back of the house, you see we have a small walkway. You see where the dog pen is right there? Mm-hmm. That's where the little addition is going to go. There's a walkway that runs right there, and we wanted to give him an access from our house on a walkway that he could come around through the back porch, or if he wanted to walk out into the front and go up to check the mail, he could exit from our gate, which would again be just right there off of it. The utilities and stuff would be attached to our structure, so he's not having to pay any utility bills. We'd be covering all those for him as well.
So there's no setback issues with respects to the placement of where Mr. Mitchell's asking to be?
No,
okay.
He'll need to adhere to the accessory structure guidelines, which is 5 feet off of the house and then off the property.
It's more than 90 feet away from the closest home.
Okay.
I guess my question is why the need for the condition of it to lapse at the end? It's not like it can be torn down at the time that he sells the property. Or at least that would be a large expense for a new homeowner.
One of the standards in the zoning ordinance for having an accessory apartment is that the homeowner has to reside in the main house and it has to be a relative living in the accessory house.
Right.
Once Mr. Mitchell, if he ever sells the house and moves away, we don't know who would occupy the house and then who they would be leasing or having living in that rear house, and we would want to make sure that that standard is upheld. I think there's probably an expectation in a lot of single-family neighborhoods that you have a homeowner and that they're not
renting to
a
stranger.
to random people, right?
So it wouldn't be that the condition would be that it would need to be removed, but rather that any additional person living in that space, other than it being a guest house for your family that come in and from time to time, they could stay there, but anybody living there permanently would need to come back and the next owner of this home.
To make sure that those standards that are laid out in the ordinance are met.
Okay.
Or maybe a man cave.
Yeah, just if the spouse wants to get away. Right. Sorry, that was just a matter of
Spouse cave, how about that?
spouse cave.
Yeah, spouse cave.
That was my curiosity for if there was any entryway in past versions of these applications. I've seen where the house has been modified in some way, interior instead of an exterior structure, and so
The layout of our house, the way it's set up, it would have completely ruined the sellability of the house in order to have done that, because we did look at trying to convert an interior apartment, but it would have meant that we would have had to have knocked out 3 walls, gotten rid of a bathroom, and cut our kitchen in half and part of our dining room in order to do it. It just, it wouldn't work.
right. Well, I certainly wouldn't want you to reduce your sellability because you had to knock down a building to sell the house either. So that's my question. That could cause a problem, but obviously not a concern. Just
Any other questions for Mr. Mitchell before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, we will go ahead and open the public hearing. Anybody that's here that would like to speak for or against this application, please come forward.
Hello again, Eric Poole, 3451 Northborough Court. So just a comment is we've never been to this, and I think we're going to be to 3 or 4 of these in the next couple of weeks, just with all the growth that's going on around the neighborhood. So I just had some additional questions with regards. So Mr. Anthony, thanks for clarifying that the special use ends at transference of the property, correct?
If that condition is approved by the board.
Okay. But the question I have coming back to that is in the future, is there any way that someone could potentially buy the property and then come back and ask for another rezoning, so for a commercial application or anything like that in the future?
Let us hear all the questions that might come up in the public hearing. We'll try to address them
Yes,
all
sir.
at the end.
You bet.
But go ahead and restate your question.
Yeah, so the first one is, first of all, how much land is actually needed to ask for a special use permit for an accessory apartment? That one, in the future, can there be another request if someone were to purchase at transfer for some sort of rezoning request for commercial application or something like that with that structure? And then it goes back a little bit to, I know that Rob said that the placement of it shouldn't be impacted by the water, but per the pictures, and we have about 50 more here with regards to kind of the flooding issues there. And my bigger concern is that with the horse farm being sold and the potential development there as well, is there's just a lot of uncertainty with regards to water in our neighborhood. And, you know, this is a small piece of something that's a lot bigger for the community there, but the concern is that that small piece could exacerbate if we have more impermeable surfaces and those types of things with regards to our backyard. So those are the questions I had.
Okay. We'll move on to see if anybody else has any questions or comments, and we'll address all those questions or comments at the end. Anyone else that would like to speak for or against this application?
Hi, I'm Barbara Duvall, and I live next to Rob, and I think it's awesome when you can take in a family member. I'm a little concerned about letting an apartment be built in a strictly residential area. We all have elderly parents, but we accommodate them within our homes without building additional structures. And if this is a temporary thing for as long as he owns the property, then maybe there's an alternative. Instead of building a permanent structure, maybe allowing, they make mobile homes any size, any shape to accommodate any need, that maybe that would be a better way to go than to have everybody in the neighborhood think, well, let's all put up accessory apartments for our elderly parents. So my question is the need really there? If he's already living in the home, if he needs that sense of independence, then perhaps one of the places around the corner would be a better alternative, or maybe a temporary structure that can be removed when and if necessary. Thank you.
Any other comment? Anybody else, excuse me, that would like to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll try to address Mr. Poole, I think is correct, his question. So the first question that I heard was how much land is needed in order to accommodate another structure. I'll let you address that one.
Sure. In this zoning district, this is the RS15, so this is our largest lot, single-family residential district. You can cover up to 25% of your lot with structures. And obviously on a very large lot, the 2.3 acres, he would have plenty of room and not go over that cap. The accessory apartment itself cannot be over 700 square feet, and the structures that he has shown have been below that cap.
Okay. Mr. Poole also asked, can another request be made when Mr. Mitchell sells this property for a different zoning or a different use of this, I guess, the whole property in question?
Anybody can request a rezoning anywhere, anytime. Getting a rezoning, getting some other zoning in the middle of a single-family neighborhood for a single lot. Mr. Halliburton serves on the Planning Commission, and I'm sure he can attest that the likelihood of that is slim to none.
And I'll make a further comment that we do from time to time get applications, actually on the Board of Zoning Appeals, for in-home businesses like somebody cutting your hair, or a daycare is another good example. And we had one either last month or the month before where we felt like that quote, you know what, they weren't really asking for a rezoning to commercial, but they were in fact asking for a business to be run out of their home. It's not to say that we decline all of those, because we have, based upon the input of the neighbors and what impact that we think that business would have, sometimes those are approved. But we had one last month that the neighbors felt like that the impact would be too much. It was a daycare. Irrespective of having an accessory structure, she was just doing it out of her house. And it was not approved because of the fact that we didn't feel like that was the right place, and it would have a negative impact on that neighborhood. So I would say you would have the right to come for us for an in-home business, so that anybody can come, but the likelihood of it being approved is going to be stand on its own merits, if that answers your question.
It does, but it could.
Yeah, right, right.
But it could anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I could do that. I could ask for that application in-home business, irrespective of whether I had an accessory structure or not, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
We've had photographers that have in-home businesses that use a room in their house that they have, or hairdressers,
yeah.
Dog washers that use their garage, convert their garage. That, you know, any of your neighbors could do that and come before the board, and you would have the right to make comments with regard to how you think that would impact your neighborhood.
The last question that I heard Mr. Poole ask was the water impact, I guess, of this particular pad, if we'll call it that Mr. Mitchell is going to build the accessory structure on. My guess is that he would not be obligated to do any type of engineering plan with respects to a 500 square foot building, but I think we need to answer Mr. Poole's question.
Yeah, so the process is that if this special use permit is approved, Mr. Mitchell would then bring in a plan and seek a building permit from the Building and Codes Department. Mr. Holtz is over here. He would go to Mr. Holtz's department get the permit application, then he would bring it to planning and engineering for review. A staff engineer would look to make sure that there weren't any problems with the flow or anything of that sort before signing off on that permit and then sending it back down to the Building and Codes Department.
And then Ms. Duval had a question. I don't know if we can answer this as a board, but her question was there a need for a separate permanent structure? Again, I don't know if that's something that we can answer. I think Mr. Mitchell has made his comments that address why he was wanting a separate structure for his father-in-law to live in, but I'm not sure we can address whether there's a need or not. His application, I think, talked about that, but go ahead.
So from the zoning ordinance, if you were to put a temporary structure there, it would be classified as a temporary structure or an RV or something of that sort, and he would not be able to have someone living in that for more than, if I remember right, 14 days out of the year, and it would have to be a bona fide emergency or something of that sort to even have someone in there for that long. So it does need to be a permanent structure on a permanent foundation per the zoning ordinance. Thank you.
All right. We've closed the public hearing. Any other questions from the commission itself for either the applicant or staff? If not, do we have a motion either for or against?
I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit.
Including the conditions set by the staff.
I don't think were there any conditions on that?
The condition that the permit would lapse upon transfer of ownership.
Right, with the condition set by the staff.
I'm laughing at myself, Ms. Mosby. I'm laughing at myself. I second your motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Mr. Mitchell, that passes. The next thing on our agenda, I think, is staff reports and other business.
We have none.
We have none. With that, we are adjourned.